Now, we're very fortunate today to have Kaarina Burge, who is here from APHRA. You've probably heard a lot about APHRA, which is the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency. Quite a mouthful, Kaarina. Come on up. So would you please make welcome Kaarina Burge. Thank you. And welcome to University of Western Sydney, Kaarina. Kaarina will be talking about registration, pathways.
Yes, how you get into psychology.
How you get into psychology. And this is critical information. So over to Kaarina. We're just going to make sure she's wired for sound. And yes, and your presentation is all here, hopefully.
All right, here we are.
How is that?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Kaarina from APHRA. It is on, I think. That's on? Yeah, I think it was, yeah. So, I'll be talking today about what is entailed in the registration process for psychology and why you should be registered. Say if you can't hear me. What you need as a prerequisite, and then these pathways. There are the internship pathways, which are the 4 years and 5 years of study, and then the 2 years of internship or 1 year of internship. And then there's this higher degree pathway as well. So I think of them as two pathways, internship and higher degree. I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of each, and then how one gets into the endorsement. When you hear clinical psychologist or organisational psychologist, their endorsement, the labels for endorsement, a special sort of skilled area. Then the National Psychology Exam. I hope that meets your needs this morning. Now, why would psychologists need to be registered? Okay, now we have been registered for many, many years, of course, when you think of psychology as a health practitioner. So I suppose my agency is really only involved in regulating the 14 health professions, medical and nursing, etc., as well as the allied health professionals, which is where psychology fits in. The risks to the public warranted that legislative oversight, and the client, that was basically based on the thought that psychologists might be dangerous. Not perhaps as dangerous as medical, but you think about it in terms of vulnerable and easily exploited clients, maybe at risk of self-harm or harm to the other. You think about situations where a child might be at risk of abuse if that client that the psychologist is working with is not that's not happening in an ethical way. So basically the other idea here is that if you have a serious mental health problem, you need appropriate treatment, which is based on evidence-based, not just the latest fad. And additionally, when there are you're having funding through Medicare or Veterans Affairs and so on, you actually probably want to ensure that you're sticking to standard professional practice so that it's cost-effective as well. Now, why would you register as a psychologist? Well, the National Act, which came in 2010, only really covers the use of the title psychologist. If you want to go off and be a family counsellor or a relationships counsellor or a caseworker, then you don't need us to register you, okay? But now there are more employers seeking registered psychologists, and access to government-funded schemes such as Medicare, Work Cover, Veterans Affairs will require you to be a registered psychologist. And also the title protects the public, that goes with the territory. And so we as health practitioners, when we're a registered psychologist, have to work within our scope of practice, so our area of expertise. If I'm a clinical psych, I can't put it out there or advertise that I'm an expert as another kind of a psychologist. Even within clinical psychology, I've got to work within what I have the capacity and the competence to work within. Otherwise, there's notifications and a mandatory and a voluntary notifications pathway, which goes to a separate agency, but we're kind of in that loop as well because of the registration side of it that we cover. If you have any burning questions, it's okay to put your hand up, by the way, but I'll be around throughout to have just one-on-ones ask me then if you like. How do we become involved in the actual qualifications to become registered? A 4-year degree. Now, all of the educational institutions are listed under the APAC website. So you'll get these slides and you can go there and you can check. And the key thing is to look for a 4-year accredited sequence of study. And here at this university, Bachelor of Arts, Psychological Studies and Social Science. And then you could add on to that these 4 years to make it a 4-year sequence. Or you do a straight out 4-year sequence, which, like the honours sequence and the Bachelor of Psych. So you'll see those all actually recognised on the APAC website, I beg your pardon. The other thing the Act needs you to do is not just have the qualifications, but to be a suitable person. So if there's any impairment that would detrimentally affect your capacity to practice with clients, this is impairments that would be of a substantial risk of harm to the client. It's not, you know, there's a legal sort of thresholds, but just worthwhile that you know about them. English language competence and criminal history. So yes, we do a criminal history check, and if you've had something like a drunk drive charge, it's worthwhile telling us that and also putting in a statement about justifying it because it'll pop up. It's all taken in terms of overall context, mitigating factors and so on, and whether it's going to be an ongoing issue for you. And then the English language competence applies to every candidate, including there are a number of countries where you put in your HSC, Australia being one of them, obviously, and then otherwise you might be sitting the IELTS, which is an English language test if you've done your secondary schooling overseas. And let's move on to looking at the pathways overview. I'll just go down the page here, and you've got your 4+2 internship and your 5+1 internship. So you're doing a 2-year full-time internship at the end of your 4 years university qualification or educational institution qualification. That's your internship. And we will register you there as a provisional psychologist and in an appropriate place where you're undertaking psychological practice. So then you, at the end of that process, you can, or throughout that process, actually, you can start submitting the case studies, and the examination is the new thing that's come in last year as well. At the end of that process, you're generally registered. So you are now a registered psychologist. You call yourself a psychologist. Until then, you call yourself a provisional psychologist. Second pathway there is your grad dip in professional psychology. Different places call that different things, but in New South Wales, there are only 3 places that run that, and I'll come to that. And in that 5th year, even at the university, you would be registered as a provisional psychologist because you do your 300 hours in that university counselling clinic or whatever with real clients. And that +1 year is the internship year where you're working in the workplace. Then you do your examination and you pass 2 case studies to us. You actually write more case studies, but we pass 2 of them. Then that hurdle is, that particular criterion is met. Then you're generally registered. Now, the higher degree pathway is where you're doing a master's or a doctorate. And these are the professional psychology degrees. They're not the research academic degrees, because APHRA is interested in registering health practitioners. Okay, so that's just a point of thing to pay attention to. The university requirements are met there. You graduate and then you are registered as a generally registered psychologist. Any questions so far? No? Okay. At the end of the higher degree, you might do a 1 or 2 year supervised practice. That is the registrar program if you want to become endorsed, say in clinical or organisational. You also need to have the same pathway degree in order to enter that program of endorsement. So a clinical psychology master's leads on to becoming a clinical psychology registrar, leads on to an endorsement in that area. Okay, 4+2 pathway. Lots of detail here. Don't worry too much about getting bogged down with the detail, but this is all in the guidelines as well. But So you do your 4 years degree, then you have a provisional registration by us, and you're doing 2 years internship in the workplace. Lots of wonderful skills, practical hands-on skills. You're doing 3,000 hours of work in psychological practice. You do the ratio is 17 and a half hours of work for every 1 hour of supervision. So there's lots of supervision. It's quite a commitment. It's quite intensive. And you do 2 years minimum. You could, if you're doing it at 17 and a half hours, it'll take you more than 2 years. Most people finish it in 2 or 3. You can take up to 5, but there's over 1,000 hours of direct client contact. The other could be client-related contact, research, and learning and so on. Then there's professional development, 60 hours, 120 hours altogether. So 60 hours in every year, and there's also a lot of supervision that goes with that. No, it's really got to... Are you talking about the supervision? No, the supervision is needs to be... And there's some direct observations in it as well. There's certain assessment tasks. There is a little bit of capacity within the... supervision is here. It's 176 hours. Sorry, I'll go this way. And the board would have to make decisions on that, but there are some that there's more capacity in the 5+1 to do that, because you're coming out with more hands-on practice at the end of the qualification. Now, so you might be sitting into your supervisor's sessions. The supervisor might sit into your sessions. You might have supervision sessions with your supervisor. Okay, so there's... now, you put in 6 monthly progress reports, which we get and have a look at APHRA, and you qualify for general registration at the end of that. Past your 3 you actually write 6 case studies, but we get you to submit the 3 best ones after your supervisor's overseen those. And then you clear the hurdle of the National Psych exam. There is a link on the website that shows you quite a lot. You know, you will have covered a lot of those in your essential grounding at university as well. Where do you find these work placements? These are the kinds of employers: health, Centrelink, defence, ageing, disability and home care, centre care. There's a lot of new opportunities in the NGO, the church and voluntary sector, and it will be things like Catholic, things like Centre Care, Mission Australia, Anglicare, and those organisations that are working with psychiatric rehab, people with mental health issues, and the disability sector as well. So there's some examples for you. They are some of the people that we've seen employing. Counsellors. So the idea here is you get a work role, right? And the employer will advertise for something like counsellor, caseworker, family therapist, clinician, senior clinician, school counsellor. The essential nature of it has to be psychological practice, which is where we would get you to put in a position statement, a duty statement. We look at what the nature of your duties are, and if they're not going to meet the core criteria, then it might be limited. But people often do several work roles. Now, so the idea is just because they don't advertise for psychologists doesn't mean you can't apply for it. You would approach the employer to see whether that would be a position that they can scope for a provisional psychologist, and you might get your supervision as part of the workplace, so you're not then paying for your supervision, and that's an added on. Even though in the 4+2 a lot of people are working in a voluntary capacity, or a provisional psych may not be paid at a high rate, it just depends on... I mean, I found a particular job when I was looking at this in the disability sector where it said registered psychologist or provisional psychologist. And so it depends a bit on what the employers are looking for and what you can encourage them to scope the job for you if you're the right person. 5+1 pathway is a 4-year accredited sequence. You do the graduate diploma of professional psychology, and you do a 1-year internship program in the workplace. As I said, there's only 3 places that offer this 5th year, and they are Macquarie, ACAP and Wollongong in New South Wales. It's a fairly new program, and so it's kind of settling into its stride, I suppose, really. It's 1 year full-time, and there are core capabilities, again, that you need to meet. There's 300 hours of practica and skills training in that 5th year at the institution before you then go into the workplace. So that so then in the 1 year internship, you're doing half of the hours that you saw on the previous slide. And the higher degree pathway, if we can move to that now. The idea here I've already mentioned is that research-only degrees are not going to lead to a pathway of registration as far as we're concerned, even though they're valuable degrees. And that's just the way the National Act is set up if you want to be a psychologist, a registered psychologist. The higher degree here at University of Western Sydney, Master of Psychology in Clinical, yeah. And then you actually are registering as a provisional psychologist when you join that program, because you're working on students within the University Counselling Centre and other external placements in the field. It might be hospitals, it might be disability sector, it might be different settings like that. You are not going to sit the National Psych exam, as far as we know, at least until 2006. Now, let's look at the pros and cons. This is just a quick snapshot. And this is a qualitative thing. There might be a little bit of difference of opinion here, but essentially higher degree is seen as more specialised, whereas the 5+1 maybe is seen as a bit more generalist because you're not getting that training at the university. And 4+2 the same. The uni provides the placements. In the 5+1 and 4+2, if you have a placement where you're already earning an income, then that's a valuable thing. And then you need to weigh up your own course fees. But in the higher degree, some people do actually work in addition to the higher degree placement in that master's. So that's a possibility as well. But we just need to register that as well, or approve that, I should say. The higher degrees lead to endorsement. They're more portable around the world, whereas the 5+1 possibly is more portable in Europe, but not the 4+. And the 4+2 isn't portable to anywhere else around the world. It's not recognised at that level of international standing. Obviously, you've got competitiveness and costs issues, competitive to get in, costly to do, but you can't be endorsed in these 5+1 and 4+2 pathways. National Psych exam is pretty straightforward in many ways. 150, there's multiple choice, 150 questions. We don't run that. That's sort of a separate section of APHRA, but it is on the portal, and there's a couple of good documents there that you can have a look at that helps you to practice and read up on the, there's a reading list as well the board put out. Area of practice endorsements. These are I think there's 9 areas. Clinical psychology is there and is organisational. I suppose the interesting thing here is that some people in certain sectors, such as organisational, have not necessarily been endorsed in organisational. And as long as they don't call themselves an organisational psychologist, which would then bring you in under the Act, then that is an issue. But they might have specialisation in working with organisational psychology issues that they've developed over the years. So the Act is interested in what you hold yourself out to be, what you call yourself, the title that you're using. And so health, I won't go through all these, but it is quite interesting to talk about, and catch me at recess, about where these people work, what is forensic, what is clinical neuropsychology, what is counselling, and so on. Here are our contact details. Any more questions you can email. That's the general information on the website, and then that's the switchboard number. Does anybody have any questions, just specifically while I'm here? Are you confused, or maybe catch up over morning tea? Questions?
Has there been a decision around the exam for endorsed professionals?
Well, higher degree people will no doubt...
So the clinical program
at the end of the program. Well, they're a higher degree program. Yeah, they won't.
They don't.
No. So it depends on how the board responds to input from providers, no doubt, as to whether that will be continued. and that's something I can't really comment on. But, you know, once you're endorsed, you do the 6 years, so you do the 4 years, 2 years master's clinical, say, you do 1 year of registration, 2 years of the registrar program, and then you pop that as an endorsed clinical psychologist. And there would be no way you'd put the exam on there because you've already been practicing. So you're talking about the examination at the end of your master's, at the end of your university qualification. Yeah. So I don't think that that would necessarily be on the cards, but it depends on what happens with input. Yeah.
Are there any further questions at the moment for Kaarina? And she has very kindly said that she'll be available during morning tea. Hang in there, everybody. She'll be around for the rest of the day or for quite a bit. And she, as you can see, she's made an offer. Please take this opportunity to speak to her in great detail, if necessary, and learn from her expertise. Before she sits down, I'd just like you to join me in a very special thank you to Kaarina for giving up her time to come here. And as a small token of our appreciation to Kaarina, we'd like to leave her with a little thought of UWS. So join me.